My name is Stephanie Gumpel. It's my 34th birthday, and I'm going to draw my life for you today. I was born at Holy Cross Hospital in Granada Hills on February 13th, 1983. I came out so fast that the nurse had to deliver me because the doctor couldn't make it to the hospital room in time. My mom is a long distance runner, like super long distance, 50 miles, 100 miles. She once ran for 25 hours straight. She's also a Korean immigrant and just a general badass. My dad was from New York City. He kind of reminded me of Robert De Niro from A Bronx Tale. He was a numismatist, which is somebody who collects and deals coins. My brother was 9.5 years older than me. He lived in Korea for the first 6 years of his life. He was a really good big brother. I grew up in a neighborhood in Camarillo with a lot of other kids. I had a best friend named Anna and a cat named Smokey. My brother would come home from college on the weekends and he'd drive me around in his car and sing songs to me off the radio and get me junk food. My dad coached me in softball and my mom would take me out on long runs. Sometimes they would take me to work with them, which was my favorite thing. I would just play with the copier all day long and make fake magazines and fake movies. When I was about 10 years old, we moved away, which I was worried about because I had to make all new friends, but it turned out to be okay. I liked my new home, and I also had a new cat named OJ. Middle school started, and one day at lunch I was sitting with all the 6th grade girls, and the lead 6th grade girl stood up, and she made me get up and leave, and she told me I wasn't allowed to eat lunch with them anymore, and everybody just sat there. And so I got up and I left. And I had no friends to eat lunch with, and I was devastated. So I used to eat lunch in the office, and sometimes my mom would come and bring lunch, and we'd eat lunch together in her car. That was really nice of her. I was having a rough time, but one day my friend Rebecca took me to a dance class with her, and something happened to me that day. I felt different. I felt like I belonged and I had a place to be. I felt comfortable. And I also felt like if I kept on working at these skills, I could take them somewhere. And at the end of the class, I think the teacher felt the same way because she took me aside privately and she told me that she felt that the way my body was and the way that I moved, she felt that I was created to dance. And that had a huge impact on me. And I fell hopelessly in love with dancing. High school rolled around and I really wanted a boyfriend, but it wasn't in the cards for me. I also started getting bullied pretty bad, both inside and outside of school. I was going deeper into dance, and I was also writing and getting very interested in art, and I didn't feel like I was fitting in or belonging at high school. I felt like I was wasting my time. So I asked my parents, and they allowed me to go on independent study, which was great, because then I could go study acting and directing a couple times a week in Los Angeles on my own. It came time for college, and I chose Boston College, and while I was there, I discovered a book called Confessions by St. Augustine, and it changed my life. The author of the book, the way that he was writing about how he lived his life and where he lived his life from, had a huge impact on me. He lived from passion and he lived from his heart, and I wanted to live that way too. And I realized I wasn't, and that if I was going to do that, I was going to have to make some big adjustments. So shortly after, I decided to go back home. It was a sad time. I felt lost. I felt like all my friends were out there partying and drinking and having a good time, and I was not part of it. But I also felt deeply that I had a mission that I was going to fulfill. I didn't know how, but I was going to live from a different place, a deeper place, somewhere in my heart. Around this time, I reconnected with a friend from high school. His name was Jeremy, and he had just gotten back from NYU Film School. And he knew how to make films, which was very exciting to me because it was something that I dreamed of doing. And we had an immediate connection, and I didn't feel so alone anymore. And we were together, and we started making movies together right away. And we came up with a dream. We were going to move to Hawaii together, and I was going to finish school, and I was going to study art and making movies and dance. And then I did it. We moved to Hawaii, and it was beautiful. And I had a motorcycle, and I rode it all around the island, and The island was so beautiful that it made my head and my heart explode, and I studied everything I wanted to study, and I made amazing friends, and I met amazing people. I learned to write screenplays and dance on stage and paint gigantic paintings, and I taught myself to direct. When I was around 26 years old, my biological father contacted me on Facebook. And until that point, I had no idea that the man who raised me was not my biological dad. It was a huge shock, and it caused a lot of upheaval in my family for a while. But in the end, we were all closer and we pulled together through it. Sometimes life is totally unpredictable. Jeremy and I moved back home and we got engaged, and we made a film that was our dream to make. It was a bigger budget short film, and it had known actors in it, and it was well written, and everyone in our community came together to make the film. It was an overwhelming effort, and it was one of the greatest things that I've ever done in my life and that I've ever experienced. But sadly, soon after, it became apparent that Jeremy and I couldn't stay together. We fought too much, so the engagement was broken. I was staying at a women's shelter because at the time I had no place else to go, when the film that I made was accepted into a very prestigious film festival. And during the day, I would be on the radio and doing interviews and getting written up in the paper and presenting my film to hundreds of people who loved it. And at night, I would be praying because I felt so alone and adrift and lost. I felt that I was in a rowboat by myself, rowing across the entire ocean, not knowing if I had what it took to go the distance. With the help of a lot of amazing people, I finally did discover that I had what it took, and I felt strong. So I moved to Los Angeles, which was a big deal for me because I had always been intimidated by the prospect of pursuing my dreams in a big city. And when I got to LA, I had no one there, and it was tough. And even for a little while, I didn't even have a roof over my head. I lived in a cubicle in a warehouse, and I had to hide so that people didn't know I was staying there at night. And I felt weak and small. So I went to a gym and I started lifting weights. And as my body grew stronger, everything else grew stronger too. And I started to sort things out, and I started to make sense of things. And as I was lifting weights and figuring out my life, I looked next to me, and there was a boy, and he was lifting weights and figuring out his life too, and his name was Chris. And it was such a coincidence because Chris loved dancing too. And after months of lifting weights and thinking about my life and hanging out with Chris, I looked over at him and I realized that we were best friends, and I realized that I was in love with him. Chris taught me the form of dance that he had mastered called breaking, and I taught him my forms of dance. It was very endearing and special. And Chris had a little girl named Apple, and I fell in love with her too. We'd draw together and build forts together, and she'd cry, and I would have to figure out how to make her happy again. The three of us were together, and it was wonderful. And some bad things happened during this time too. My dad passed away, and that was a really big deal because he was my number one supporter, and I didn't know how I was going to go on without him. And I also lost my job. But Chris encouraged me to keep going, and I didn't give up, and the three of us kept going together. I kept pushing forward. I knew something would happen if I kept moving forward. I knew that something would break through. So I kept on reaching out to people about starting creative projects, and I kept on trying to get things going. And one day something broke through. One of my screenplay ideas sold. And that is one of my greatest dreams, and it came true. But as one dream was coming true, another was falling apart. And Chris and I split up. And it was horrible and sad. I felt like I lost my little pack. And the strength of the wolf is the pack. And the strength of the pack is the wolf. Sometimes life is unpredictable. But if it was meant to be, we'll find each other. And if it isn't, life will create something else. I believe that. I trust that. As hard as it was, I needed to keep going. I had a whole screenplay to write ahead of me, and I needed to push through. I kept dancing, I kept working out, and day by day, page by page, the work got done. And here I am today, and I think I'm doing pretty good. I'm living from my heart, just like I always wanted. And every day I work to pull my family and my friends close to me. That's why I made this video. It's for you, to say thank you for the role that you've played in my life. Thank you for talking to me. Thank you for spending time with me. Thank you for leaving comments on my page. Thank you for thinking of me. And I want to see you this year. I want this to be the best year yet. Thank you for everything you've done. I hope I see you soon.